Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today, we're returning to one of the world's most closely watched missing child investigations. Not to revisit the timeline, but to examine the suspects, the evidence, and why so many questions remain unanswered.
Thank you. And, it's a profoundly tragic situation we're walking through today. 19 years have passed now.
Yeah, almost 2 full decades.
Exactly. And what we're looking at is, pretty much the absolute definition of investigative muddy waters. The sheer gravity of the global attention didn't just document this mystery. It actually actively altered the environment where the mystery was trying to be solved.
Right, because today we aren't just reciting that standard 2007 narrative. We're exploring, thousands of pages of police files, the independent forensic reviews, and international treaties to really untangle how the world's microscope basically ruined the crime scene.
It really did. Yeah. Because if you track the suspect list over the last 2 decades, it doesn't look like a methodical narrowing of leads at all.
No, it's erratic.
Yeah, it looks like a searchlight in a hall of mirrors. Every time investigators tried to focus their beam on one single piece of evidence, the media just reflected it into like a dozen distorted silhouettes.
Which is so true. We go from looking at local Rodanists who live just yards away to the unthinkable scenario of the parents themselves, and then to transient workers, and eventually to a foreign national with a deeply, deeply dark past.
And that searchlight analogy is really critical to understanding why these high-profile investigations are so perilous. When a case generates that kind of massive, relentless global attention, it inevitably creates an insurmountable list of persons of interest.
Because everyone is suddenly a suspect.
Pretty much. The public pressure on law enforcement, it stops being a motivator, becomes this physical weight. They're essentially forced to chase every single shadow that gets reported.
And I imagine that pressure just leads to dangerous tunnel vision.
It does. And historically, as we'll see, it leads to the public naming and absolute ruination of innocent people.
Which brings us to the central question we really want you, the listener, to keep in mind as we walk through this today. Has this unprecedented public and media attention actually helped the search for answers?
Or has it irrevocably hindered the pursuit of truth?
Exactly. By muddying the waters with all the noise, the speculation, and, the armchair detective work. We all know the geography of the Ocean Club Resort, Parking 5A, right?
Right, in Praia da Luz.
Yeah, the quiet village in Portugal. We know the 82-meter walk the adults made to the tapas restaurant. We know the 10 p.m. discovery that Madeleine was missing. But what the public really misunderstands is the physical and acoustic reality of that space.
And how that space set the stage for an absolute forensic catastrophe.
Yeah. So let's start with the so-called golden hours protocol, or I guess the complete collapse of it.
Well, the golden hours in law enforcement, that refers to the immediate aftermath of a crime. It's this incredibly brief window where traced evidence, DNA, fibers, footprints is pristine.
Because no one else has contaminated it yet.
Precisely. In forensic science, there's this foundational concept called Locard's exchange principle. It dictates that every contact leaves a trace. The perpetrator brings something to the scene, and they take something away.
But Locard's principle is, incredibly fragile, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It is remarkably delicate.
Because if, say, a dozen other people walk into the room, they're all exchanging their own traces, right? I was reading their review by Mark Williams Thomas, and he notes that up to 20 people entered apartment 5A before the local police could even effectively cordon it off.
20 people. Let that sink in. Resort staff, friends, the local municipal police who arrived first.
We aren't just talking about a compromised scene at that point.
No, you're talking about a microscopic battleground that was entirely paved over. They are breathing into the room, touching surfaces, moving furniture around, stepping on the floorboards.
Wow. So any fiber from an actual suspect is just gone?
Buried. Any fiber from a suspect's clothing is now under fibers from a hotel manager's suit or a local officer's uniform. Any microscopic skin cells left on that bedroom window ledge are mixed with the DNA of the people leaning out of that very window to shout for help.
See, I struggle to understand how the perimeter wasn't instantly locked down. Even if the room was totally chaotic, you'd expect a hard line drawn around the resort itself immediately.
It would hurt so, yes.
But the border police and the marine police weren't notified with descriptions for hours. Roadblocks on the main highways leading toward the Spanish border, they weren't set up until 10 a.m. the next morning. It feels like a systemic failure rather than just, a localized panic.
Well, it is a systemic failure, but it's rooted in jurisdictional friction and these standard operating assumptions. You have to remember, Praia da Luz was a quiet, low-crime holiday village.
Right, they weren't used to this.
Exactly. The initial assumption by the local responders was a wandering child, not a sophisticated, targeted abduction. By the time the working theory actually shifted to abduction, that geographic containment window had completely shattered.
Because the Spanish border is so close.
Yes, and it's incredibly porous. A vehicle could easily cross it long before 10 a.m. Interpol took 5 days to issue a global missing person alert.
5 days, that's unbelievable.
And back at the apartment, the handling of the physical environment was frankly alarming. There are reports of an officer dusting the bedroom window's exterior shutter for fingerprints without wearing gloves or protective clothing.
Wait, hold on. You're saying the investigator dusting for prints wasn't wearing gloves?
Yeah.
In 2007.
Correct. And that lack of basic forensic hygiene, it creates a total vacuum of reliable physical evidence.
That's just mind-blowing.
It is. And when law enforcement lacks physical scientific facts, they are forced to rely on narrative theories. They have to build a profile based on behavior, on proximity, rather than hard science.
And because they had no physical footprints to follow, the Portuguese police were essentially forced to rely on psychological ones, which leads directly to the naming of the first major suspect, Robert Murat.
Yes.
And this introduces a legal term that completely hijacked the entire media narrative, the arguido.
The arguido system is perhaps one of the most culturally misunderstood aspects of this entire investigation.
For sure, because to the British tabloid press, being named an arguido translated directly to being indicted or just straight up guilty.
Right. But in the Portuguese civil law system, it is fundamentally a protective mechanism for the citizen.
Can you help me understand the mechanics of that? Because the UK and the US, we operate on common law. Why does assigning a suspect status actually protect someone?
Well, we have to look at the historical context here. Portugal emerged from a decades-long authoritarian dictatorship in 1974. Following the Carnation Revolution, their whole legal system was deliberately restructured.
To prevent abuses of power.
Exactly. To prevent the police from holding and interrogating people indefinitely without rights. In Portugal, if the police begin to suspect you of a crime, they are legally obligated to formally declare you an arguido.
Oh, interesting.
Because once that label is applied, you suddenly gain the right to remain silent, the right to have a lawyer present during questioning, and the right to not self-incriminate.
So it's essentially the Portuguese equivalent of reading someone their Miranda rights, but formalized as an actual legal status. Like, if you are just a witness, you have to answer questions.
Right. But if you were an arguido, you can just say no comment.
That makes so much sense. It's a shield against state overreach.
Precisely. But when Robert Murat, who was a 34-year-old British-Portuguese man living just 150 yards away, when he stepped forward to volunteer as a translator for the police, his proximity just made people suspicious.
Right. He was just there all the time helping out.
Yeah. And a British journalist essentially convinced the local police that Murat was acting strangely. So the police named him an arguido so they could question him more aggressively.
And then the British media broadcasted that label as a definitive, legally binding declaration of his guilt.
Exactly. The translation was completely lost.
The media circus that descended on Murat is terrifying, honestly. His home was raided, his garden was dug up and searched with ground-penetrating radar. His associates were hounded.
I believe one even had a car set on fire by vigilantes.
Yes. And yet there was zero physical evidence linking him to the room. The mechanism of public ruin operated entirely independently of the mechanism of actual criminal justice.
It's a terrifying precedent.
He was finally cleared in 2008 and won around £600,000 in libel damages. But, the psychological toll of being globally branded a child abductor based on a mistranslated legal concept, it's incomprehensible.
It truly is. And when the Murat theory collapsed under the weight of its own emptiness, the Portuguese investigators were still lacking any physical trace of a stranger, so they pivoted to the most controversial phase of the investigation.
September 2007.
Yes. They officially named Kate and Jerry McCann as arguidos.
This is where we need to spend some serious time dissecting the science. Because the public perception here was entirely driven by leaked, misunderstood forensics.
Highly misunderstood.
The Portuguese police developed this theory that the child had died accidentally in the apartment, and the parents staged an abduction to cover it up. To support this, they relied on two specific things.
The specialized dogs and low copy number DNA testing.
Right. Let's walk through the dogs first. Eddie and Kilo.
Okay, so Eddie was a victim recovery dog, specifically trained to detect the scent of human cadavers. Kilo was a crime scene dog trained to detect human blood. The British police brought them over in August 2007.
So several months after the disappearance.
Yes. They were taken through apartment 5A, and the dogs altered their behavior, what handlers call an alert, in several areas. Behind the sofa, near the wardrobe, and later on the keys to a silver Renault Scenic rental car.
And inside the boot of that car as well. Now, to a layperson reading newspaper headline, a cadaver dog alerting in a car trunk sounds like absolute, incontrovertible proof that a body was there.
It sounds damning, but the biological mechanics of how a dog smells are completely divorced from the legal requirements of proof.
How so?
Well, we have to understand what a dog is actually detecting. They are not detecting a body per se. They are detecting volatile organic compounds, or VOCs.
Okay, VOCs.
When organic matter breaks down, it releases specific chemical byproducts. These like putrescine and cadaverine. A dog's olfactory epithelium is incredibly dense, possessing hundreds of millions of scent receptors.
So they are insanely sensitive.
They could detect these compounds in parts per trillion. It's astonishing.
But hold on, are those specific compounds exclusive to a deceased human? Like, could a dog alert to something else that produces similar VOCs?
That is the core issue. While highly trained dogs are remarkably accurate, the scientific community widely acknowledges that certain cleaning chemicals, or decaying animal matter, or even cross-contamination can produce overlapping VOC profiles.
So a cleaning spray could trick the dog.
Potentially, yes. But more importantly, an alert does not establish a timeline. A dog might alert to a location where someone bled 3 years prior to the event in question.
Oh, wow, I hadn't thought of that.
And from a legal standpoint, an alert is simply an investigative tool. It is not evidentiary proof. In a court of law, you cannot cross-examine a dog.
Right, you can't ask the dog, hey, did you smell putrescine or a spilled chemical?
Exactly. You can only put the handler on the stand to testify that the dog's behavior changed. An alert generates a lead. It requires actual physical science to become a conviction.
Which brings us directly to the physical science they attempted to use, the low copy number, or LCN, DNA profiling.
Yes, a highly complex and sensitive technique.
The police swabbed the boot of the rental car. And we should note, this was a car the parents didn't hire until 24 days after the disappearance. They sent these microscopic fibers and hair to the Forensic Science Service in Birmingham.
And the British tabloids subsequently ran these massive screaming headlines claiming a 100% DNA match to the missing child.
But when you actually look at the cellular mechanics of LCN testing, a 100% match is basically biologically impossible in this context, right?
It is entirely impossible to state that definitively. To understand why it was a false narrative, we have to look at how standard DNA testing actually works.
Okay, let's break that down.
Standard DNA profiling requires a relatively robust sample of cells, visible blood, saliva, semen. The lab uses a process called polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, to amplify the DNA.
PCR, right. We've heard a lot about that in recent years.
Think of PCR as a molecular photocopier. It uses thermal cycling to unzip the DNA strands and replicate them, usually running for about 28 cycles.
To create enough material to generate a readable genetic profile on a graph, a clear barcode.
Precisely. But what happens if you only have 3 or 4 skin cells to begin with?
You can't run the standard 28 cycles.
You can, but you won't get enough material. That is where low copy number testing comes in. LCN is designed for trace amounts of DNA. Sometimes literally just a few cells left from a passing fingerprint.
Okay, so how do they read it?
To get a reading, the laboratory increases the PCR cycles. They push it up to 34 cycles instead of 28.
That makes sense. Just copy it more times.
It does. But there is a massive scientific trade-off. When you amplify something that many times, you also amplify the background noise, the errors, and any microscopic contamination.
So it's like photocopying a really blurry photo a billion times. Eventually, all the artifacts and the dust on the glass look like they're part of the original image.
That is a perfect analogy. In LCN testing, scientists deal with what we call stochastic effects.
Stochastic effects.
Yes. It basically means that alleles, the genetic markers, might just drop out and not show up on the graph at all. Or stray alleles from microscopic contamination in the lab might drop in.
Oh man, so it's totally unpredictable at that level.
Exactly. And the sample from the Renault Scenic Boot was entirely compromised by these stochastic effects. The forensic scientist who ran the test, John Lowe, explicitly warned the police in his report.
I actually have the exact quote from Lowe's report here because it completely contradicts that entire 100% match media narrative.
Please read it. It's crucial.
He wrote, within the DNA profile, there are 20 DNA components represented by 19 peaks on a chart. Of these 19 components, 15 are present within the result from this item. In my opinion, therefore, this result is too complex for meaningful interpretation. We cannot answer the question, is the match genuine or is it a chance match?
Too complex for meaningful interpretation. The complexity arises from how familial DNA works. You share 50% of your genetic profile with your mother and 50% with your father.
Right.
If both parents have been in that rental car shedding skin cells, and their other children have been in the car shedding skin cells, you end up with an aggregated mixture of alleles.
That mathematically just resembles the missing child's profile by pure chance.
Exactly. It's a composite that looks like the missing child, but it's just the family's ambient DNA. Lowe even noted that elements of the profile were present in the DNA of the scientists working in the Birmingham lab itself. The ambient environment is saturated with microscopic DNA.
That is absolutely staggering. The lead forensic scientist stated in writing that the result was too complex for meaningful interpretation, yet the Portuguese police leaked it as definitive proof.
And the British police, seemingly paralyzed by institutional politics and diplomatic protocols, just refused to publicly correct the record.
The institutional friction here really cannot be overstated. Jim Gamble, who was the former head of the UK's Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre, he observed that the Portuguese police felt the British authorities were acting like a, quote, colonial power.
Which is a devastating dynamic for an investigation. The British arrived accustomed to these centralized high-tech relational databases like Holmes 2, which can cross-reference thousands of statements instantly.
And the Portuguese police.
They were managing a monumental global investigation using physical boxes of paper files. They required magisterial approval for almost every procedural step. The resentment was palpable.
And in that hostile environment, defending the actual science took a backseat to defending institutional pride.
Unfortunately, yes. And the parents suffered immensely for it.
They were subjected to grueling interrogations. Kate was reportedly offered this horrific plea deal, confessed to accidental death, served 2 years, and Jerry goes free.
An unthinkable situation.
She refused, of course, exercising her right as an arguido to remain silent on 48 questions. And finally, in July 2008, the Portuguese Attorney General archived the case due to a total lack of evidence lifting that arguido status.
But the damage to the narrative was permanent. It was already out there.
Yeah, it forced the parents into this surreal position of having to fund private investigations. They brought in agencies like Oakley International and Medito 3 just to keep the search active.
Because the official channels had effectively closed. It wasn't until 2011, under intense public pressure, that the British government launched Operation Grange.
Right, Scotland Yard effectively restarted the investigation from scratch, treating it definitively as a criminal act by a stranger.
And the scale of Operation Grange is just mind-boggling. They reviewed over 8,000 potential sightings. They took 1,300 statements and analyzed 650 sex offenders.
And as of right now, it has cost the British taxpayer over £13.2 million. But it was the slow, agonizingly methodical telecommunications review that led to the massive pivot in June 2020.
Yes. German prosecutors announced they had concrete evidence against the new prime suspect, Christian Brückner.
Let's examine Brückner, because he represents the intersection of proximity, capability, and history.
He really does. He is a convicted offender with a horrific history of child sexual abuse. Between 1995 and 2007, He lived transiently in Praia da Luz.
Operating primarily out of a really distinctive VW camper van, right?
Yes, and he supported his lifestyle out there through systematic burglaries of local holiday apartments.
And it wasn't just his background that made him a suspect, it was the telecommunications data. German authorities found that his cell phone pinged off a mast near the Ocean Club Resort within 5 minutes of the window when the abduction occurred.
Now, we have to be very clear about the mechanics of 2007 geolocation data.
Mm.
Cell tower pings back then do not provide the GPS coordinates we're used to today.
So it's not like dropping a pin on a map.
No, not at all. They provide sector data. The phone connects to the nearest tower with the strongest signal, indicating the device is within a certain geographic arc, usually covering a few square miles.
Okay, so while it places him in the immediate vicinity of the resort, it does not mathematically place him inside apartment 5A.
Correct. However, when you combine that ping with the behavioral evidence, things get very dark.
Like what?
Well, he abruptly re-registered his Jaguar car to a new owner the very day after the disappearance. And an ex-girlfriend claimed he told her he had a, quote, horrible job to do that would change his life. The circumstantial web becomes incredibly dense.
Currently, as we record this in 2026, Brückner has just finished serving a 7-year sentence for a brutal 2005 assault in Praia da Luz. He is living in Germany on social welfare under an electronic tag.
And the UK Metropolitan Police are reportedly pushing extremely hard for his extradition.
But I want to take a step back from the current legal maneuvering for a moment. Because the forensic failures, the complex LCN DNA confusion, and the cross-border friction we just walked through, all of that created an absolute void of reliable information.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. When official channels fail to provide clear answers, the public fills the gaps. So let's explore the internet theories and the cultural interpretations of this tragedy.
The internet's response to this case is basically a masterclass in apophenia.
Apophenia. That's the human tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things, right?
Exactly. When the official findings contradicted the public's intuition, the digital sphere just constructed its own reality.
The earliest manifestation of this was the Pact of Silence theory. The Portuguese press, most notably the weekly paper Sol, published massive articles accusing the adults at the resort of conspiring to cover up a death.
And the internet immediately latched on to minor discrepancies in their police statements to prove it.
Right, like Jerry McCann stating in an early interview that he used the locked front door to check on the kids. But later, he said he used the unlocked rear patio doors.
Yes.
To an armchair detective on a Reddit forum, that discrepancy is undeniable proof of a lie.
But the armchair detective operates without understanding the psychological mechanics of memory under severe trauma. When an individual experiences an acute stressor, like a missing child, the brain floods with cortisol.
Okay, and what does cortisol do?
It profoundly impacts the hippocampus, which is the region of the brain responsible for forming and retrieving episodic memories.
See, I struggle with that a little bit. As a parent, if you check on your kids, you know the physical action you took. Turning a metal key in a lock feels entirely different from sliding a heavy glass door. How does trauma entirely rewrite a physical tactile memory within 48 hours?
Well, it doesn't rewrite the tactile memory itself. It conflates the timeline of when that memory occurred. Jerry McCann later clarified that they had been using the front door earlier in the week.
Oh,
But because the key was noisy and the door was right next to the children's bedroom, they switched to the back patio routine later on. Under the extreme cognitive load of a police interrogation, his brain retrieved a genuine memory of unlocking the front door, but misplaced it chronologically into the night of the disappearance.
That makes total sense.
In trauma psychology, this is entirely standard. But the internet demands perfect robotic logic from chaotic, highly traumatic events.
Ah, yes, the prestigious Reddit school forensics. We saw that exact demand for perfect logic with the exterior metal shutter on the bedroom window as well.
The shutter debate, yes.
Kate found the shutter raised. Jerry told police that when he first arrived, he lowered the shutter, went outside, and realized the non-ferrous metal slats could only be raised from the outside by physically forcing them.
And the Portuguese police countered that forcing those specific metal slats would have created a tremendous amount of noise in a quiet courtyard. Noise that no one reported hearing.
So the internet concluded the parents must have raised it from the inside to stage a break-in.
But again, this completely ignores basic, boring alternatives.
Like the intruder simply leaving through the front door, or the shutter's internal mechanism just being faulty, or the noise being masked by the ambient sounds of the nearby tapas restaurant and the ocean.
Exactly. But a faulty mechanism doesn't make for a good, thrilling conspiracy theory. When the public feels deprived of a logical narrative, they build competing dramatic models.
For years, the digital discourse was violently split between two camps: a highly targeted, pre-planned stranger abduction versus a burglary gone wrong. Let's examine the mechanics of both theories because both have compelling circumstantial foundations.
Let's look at the planned abduction first. We have multiple witnesses reporting bizarre behavior in the days prior. A witness reported seeing an ugly blonde man watching the apartment.
Two men were seen lingering on an empty balcony nearby as well.
Furthermore, the Ocean Club Resort utilized an open message book at the pool reception. It explicitly stated that the McCann group had block booked their restaurant table every night at 8:30 p.m., noting that children were asleep in the apartments.
That's terrifying. Anyone walking by could just flip through that book and have the exact blueprint of their routine.
Exactly. On the other hand, the burglary gone wrong theory is rooted in hard statistical data. There had been a four-fold increase in local burglaries in the region between January and May 2007.
In the 17 days leading up to the disappearance, 2 other apartments in that specific block were broken into through the windows. And we know Brückner was a highly active burglar in that specific area.
Right. If an intruder breaks in looking for cash or passports, and a child wakes up and begins to cry, the psychology of the intruder shifts instantly from acquisition to panic.
The escalation to violence can happen in seconds just to silence the child.
And the internet spent a decade obsessing over the timeline of that potential escalation, specifically focusing on 2 dueling sightings.
First, the Tanner sighting. At 9:15 p.m., Jane Tanner saw a man carrying a barefoot child in light-colored pink pajamas walking rapidly away from the apartment block.
The Tanner sighting was immediately weaponized by the media. It became the foundational anchor of the timeline for years. But it was an investigative red herring.
Yeah, it took Scotland Yard 6 years to definitively identify the man Tanner saw. It wasn't an abductor at all. It was just another British tourist picking up his daughter from the resort's night crash. They even matched the specific pajamas his girl was wearing.
But while the entire world fixated on the Tanner sighting, a second, far more credible sighting was actively suppressed.
The Smith sighting.
Yes. At 10 p.m., the exact time the disappearance was discovered, an Irish couple, Martin and Mary Smith, were walking toward the beach. They passed a man carrying a blonde, barefoot girl.
And the man did not look like a tourist. He wasn't wearing holiday clothing, and he appeared distinctly uncomfortable carrying the child.
Now, here is where the information control becomes incredibly damaging. Oakley International, the private investigators, generated e-fit sketches based on the Smith sighting in 2008, but they buried them.
They didn't release them to the public for 5 years, not until Scotland Yard forced the issue on a television broadcast in 2013. Why would they bury that?
Because the man in the sketch bore a passing resemblance to Jerry McCann. Martin Smith had even contacted police after seeing Jerry on TV, noting the resemblance, though he later acknowledged it couldn't have been him given the strict timeline.
So the private team feared releasing the e-fit would just pour gasoline on the conspiracy theories against the parents.
And this is the paradox of narrative control. By withholding evidence to prevent a conspiracy theory, they created the ultimate conspiracy theory. The Streisand effect takes over.
Right, because when the public discovers evidence was hidden, they do not assume incompetence or PR management. They immediately assume malice. They assume a massive cover-up.
The trial by media that fueled these assumptions was staggering in its volume. The Portuguese tabloid Correio de Manhã published 384 articles about the case in just over 12 months.
The ecosystem of misinformation became so toxic that the parents eventually testified at the Leveson inquiry in the UK, just dissecting how the press commodified their trauma for clicks and sales.
And we really cannot ignore the human cost of this digital ecosystem. In 2014, a woman named Brenda Leyland, who had obsessively trolled the parents online under a pseudonym, was ambushed by a TV reporter on camera.
I remember that.
The exposure shattered her reality, and tragically, days later, she took her own life. The cultural obsession with solving the unsolvable has a literal collateral body count.
Even prestigious platforms feed the cycle. The 2019 Netflix documentary series brought the case to a whole new generation. Instantly, TikTok and Reddit exploded with the exact same debates from 2008.
Just refresh the trauma.
And just this year, in January 2026, the release of documents related to the Epstein files briefly name-dropped the case in a 2019 email. And to be perfectly clear to our listeners, we are simply reporting that the name appeared in the source material. We aren't endorsing it.
But that simple mention instantly spawned 100 YouTube videos claiming vast global trafficking networks, completely detached from any verified investigative findings.
A single out-of-context data point in a massive document dump is all the algorithmic echo chamber needs to ignite. It thrives on connecting disparate dots, ignoring whether the underlying mechanisms connect logically.
Exactly. So, having explored the catastrophic official missteps of the golden hours and the damaging sociological phenomena of the internet's response, we need to strip away all this noise.
What does the evidence actually dictate today in the realm of criminal justice?
We must strictly differentiate between the language of the public and the language of the law. Being a person of interest, being an arguido, being a suspect, and being a convicted offender are four entirely distinct legal universes.
Let's lay that out for the listener. The parents were arguidos based on the misinterpretation of cadaver dogs and LCN DNA. Both mechanisms, as we've clearly established, fall vastly short of the evidentiary burden of proof required for a trial.
Conversely, Christian Brückner is a convicted offender. He's been tried, convicted, and imprisoned for horrific predatory crimes in the exact same geography.
He possessed the capability, the local knowledge, and the behavioral profile of an abductor. German prosecutors, led by Hans Christian Wolters, have publicly stated they are 100% convinced Brückner murdered the child.
Which is incredibly aggressive language for a prosecutor. Usually prosecutors deal in words like alleged and suspected. To say 100% convinced suggests they have something massive.
It suggests they have deep circumstantial confidence.
Yes, but in criminal law, confidence is not evidence. They face a monumental legal hurdle, the corpus delicti, the body of the crime.
Right.
Prosecuting a murder without human remains, without a confession, and without a definitive forensic link in the suspect's vehicle or home is one of the most difficult challenges in modern jurisprudence.
They certainly tried to find that physical link, though. In May 2023, German authorities executed a massive search of the Arade Reservoir, roughly 30 miles from Praia da Luz.
Because Brückner used to camp there, referring to it as his little paradise.
They brought in heavy machinery, ground-penetrating radar, and specialized teams to scour the scrublands.
The mechanics of ground-penetrating radar are fascinating, really. It emits high-frequency radio waves into the soil and records the echoes reflecting off buried anomalies.
But the soil composition, the water table, and the passage of 16 years at that point, that degrades physical evidence rapidly, doesn't it?
Incredibly fast. They found a piece of fabric resembling a child's sock, but no smoking gun, no remains. In June 2025, they utilized the same technology to dig up abandoned buildings between the resort and the cottage where Brückner lived.
And what did they find there?
They recovered animal bones, but nothing human.
And beyond the lack of physical evidence, bringing Brückner to trial involves navigating a total geopolitical minefield. The UK Metropolitan Police reportedly believe they can build a circumstantial case for abduction and murder to present to the Crown Prosecution Service.
They desperately want to extradite him from Germany to the UK.
But the German constitution stands in the way.
Specifically, Article 26 of the German Basic Law, or the Grundgesetz. To understand why this roadblock exists, we again have to look at history.
Okay, the post-WWII context.
Yes. The Basic Law was drafted after World War II. It was designed with deep structural protections to prevent the state from ever again arbitrarily handing its citizens over to foreign powers or arbitrary courts.
So Article 26 severely restricts the extradition of German citizens to nations outside the European Union.
Exactly. And because of Brexit, the United Kingdom is now a non-EU nation. So we have an institutional stalemate.
Even though there is a reciprocal post-Brexit extradition agreement that came into force in 2021, the German constitutional protections mean they have the legal right to block the extradition of their own citizen.
Precisely. German prosecutors want to try him in Germany, but they lack the definitive physical evidence to bring charges under their strict legal standards.
And the UK authorities believe they have a path to trial, but they lack the physical jurisdiction over the suspect.
It leaves you with a haunting philosophical question. What does this mean for the concept of justice? If a suspect is identified, but diplomatic red tape prevents a trial, how do we balance the victim's fight for truth with the rigid realities of international law?
And furthermore, if the forensic technology to definitively solve this case, perhaps extracting a full DNA profile from a single fossilized skin cell on that metal shutter, is invented 10 years from now, will it even matter?
That's the real tragic question.
Because the chain of custody from that first trampled night is so irrevocably broken, wouldn't any defense attorney just point to the 20 people who walked through the room and have the new science thrown straight out of court?
Most likely, yes. It is the tragedy of a case where the science might eventually catch up, but the foundational legal architecture has already collapsed.
Investigators are just forced to rely on circumstantial building blocks. The telecommunications sector data, the witness testimony of a suspect changing his car registration, the behavioral escalation of a local burglar.
But without that definitive physical link, the legal system just remains frozen.
The burden of ambiguity in this case is truly staggering. The absolute absence of definitive answers creates a void. And as we've explored today, decades of speculation, algorithmic echo chambers, and tabloid headlines will inevitably rush in to fill that void,
Often causing catastrophic collateral damage in the process.
That's exactly why we wanted to walk through this with you today, to strip away the noise, the misconstrued dog alerts, and the packs of silence, and look solely at the mechanisms behind the timeline, the science, and the law. We want to thank you for joining us and examining the reality beneath the headlines.
Because when you remove the media circus and the geopolitical friction, what remains is the devastating loss of a child, and a stark, sobering lesson in how fragile the mechanisms of justice truly are when subjected to the weight of the world's attention.
Think back to that searchlight in the Hall of Mirrors. The beam is still searching, but the reflections are starting to fade, leaving us to wonder if the truth was blinded by the light. Next time, we return to the lonely farmhouse of Hinakaifek, where strange footprints appeared in fresh snow, unsettling diary entries hinted that something wasn't right, and a family ignored warnings that would soon become chilling in hindsight.